And we are recording Mr.
Uh,
Nathaniel Mead on Thursday, February 29th, 2024 at 10:16 a.m. To talk about a paper retraction, which, as we were just saying, means that it's good. Whenever Dr. McCullough has a paper retracted, it means that it's right on the money. And whenever you're, I guess, labeled as anything negative without actually addressing the core part of your argument, that means you've won. So it's the same thing with, they're a bunch of hippies, and it's like, well, that you're not addressing why they don't like the Vietnam War. You're just saying they're hippies. And that's very simple. And but if there ever is actual arguments against something, then it's good for it to have some meat into it. If somebody says this is why the paper's wrong, this, and this study from here said that. Well, then you've got a legitimate clash of ideas. And it's not even really a clash of ideas. It's just a process of peer review. When there's none of that and it's just shut it down, he's a Nazi, he's an anti-vaxxer, then it's you hit it. It's bingo. You got exactly what it is. And it's kind of in an odd way, it's sort of the best validation you can get. It's one thing if your colleagues applaud you, but if somebody from the establishment is like, "Hey, he's evil," you're like, "Hey, we did it. That's not an A plus. That's like an A plus plus. That's 105. You smoked it." So with that, I'll shut up. Mr. Mead, please introduce yourself. And guys, I think you can download the paper. I think the link is still in the description. It should be. But Mr. Mead, please introduce yourself.
Please call me Nathaniel.
Okay.
Yeah. And yeah, so you're right. I mean, we were right over the target, and so we got retracted. It's become a unfortunate practice now that in order to try to silence the opposition or to silence those who are questioning abuses of authority, you you have to retract scientific papers. So the scientific truth itself is under assault. And what we tried to do is in this paper is we tried to make sense of what has happened over the past 4 years, and to make sense from a scientific perspective. So we were just offering our perspective and doing a very very clear and cogent analysis or presenting analyses, but also doing our own analyses of how harmful these gene-based products, these mRNA vaccines, which also go by gene therapy products, how harmful they were to the public. So we did a bunch of estimates on that, and obviously it threatened the industry profoundly. And as I told Children's Health Defense, the moment I hit that um, publish button, it did feel like there was a ticking time bomb, that we were about to, unleash the wrath of the industry, and it was going to be a messy affair with lots of uh, nasty comments, hurled at us on underneath the article. So the article appeared in a journal called Curious, spelled Cure Us, Cureus. So it's kind of an interesting play on
Mm-hmm.
words because to be curious as a scientist is a really good thing, and to cure people also is a good thing. So it has a kind of a nice double entendre there.
Yeah.
And I actually was attracted to this journal. It's kind of an interesting story. Um, my background is I've done a lot of science writing. I've written books. I've written a lot of papers. Some about 45 papers on PubMed, including one recently retracted. And so I was, very interested in telling this story. And so what happened was back in 2022, I believe it was, Steve Kirsch invited a whole bunch of scientists to participate in discussions to help him with his debate process. So you had to send in your resume and a cover letter, and so I got into this group, and we started to have these great discussions about what was going on, and how the Pfizer and Moderna trials were misleading, and how they created a lot of deception that misled the public on a massive scale. Obviously, I mean, resulted in an uncontrolled global experiment. And so those discussions inspired me to write this paper. And we first submitted the paper to a medical journal called Lineker Quarterly, which is a journal of the Catholic Medical Association, which
Huh.
I didn't even know there was a thing. But so they looked it over, and it freaked them out. The editor in chief said, "Well, we're not rejecting it, but if you want us to publish it, you're going to have to rewrite the whole thing." And I said, "Well, that kind of means a rejection. So
Yeah.
I think we're going to go elsewhere." But that was a peer review process that involved two reviewers, and they were terrible reviewers. They were probably the worst reviewers I've ever worked with, but it was because they were programmed to believe that these products really have some benefit. The term blue pilled comes to mind. And so they were very much um, in a certain camp, and we knew that from the beginning. But the benefit of the process was there was a guest editor for that journal who said, "Hey, you should check out this journal, Curious." And he sent me a clip that indicated that Curious was standing up to pressure from the pharmaceutical industry to retract papers. So I thought, wow, that's really great. This is a journal that is holding their ground. But this was before, and I didn't realize this, in December of 2022, Curious was acquired by a very large publisher, Springer. Springer Nature, which is now the largest medical publisher in the world, um, acquired the journal. And so they're very powerful. And they, I think, because they have so many open access journals, which means you can access these things for free as a reader, it's kind of putting it's obvious that you have to have other streams of revenue that are pretty substantial. And so the pharmaceutical advertising, sponsorships of content, and sponsorships of conferences and other things that journals depend on um, were are probably a big part of their revenue stream. So, uh, I mean, I didn't really think about it because I was hoping that, having seen some other papers in there that suggested that they were very brave, like, for example, most recently they had a paper on there about the multi-hit hypothesis of cancer, oncogenesis, genesis of cancer, and the progression of cancer. And so I thought, well, that's promising. If they're willing to publish that in relationship to the COVID-19 vaccinations, that's what the paper was about. Also, they had one on, like, how diabetes predisposes people to the harmful effects of the vaccines. So it looked like they were open to exploring some of these issues. And there were other articles that convinced me of that. So I thought, okay, this is a good fit for us. And but at the same time, our paper was devastating. It was a devastating story of because it wove together all of the key elements of the research in such a way that it led us to the inevitable conclusion that you had to get these things off the market now because they are too dangerous. And so we proposed a global moratorium. First time ever that a peer-reviewed paper has proposed that. Various countries and politicians have proposed it. Joe Ladapo, Surgeon General in Florida, he proposed it. But as far as the scientific paper, this is the first one, also proposing that we get it off the childhood immunization schedule right away, which is a necessary step, as you know, because that protects, having it on the schedule protects the industry from any lawsuits. So it's obviously a huge threat when you say, well, we got to get it off the childhood immunization schedule. So when we got the letter of retraction, we knew that that those were the main reasons that they were trying to get rid of us and suppress the narrative. But some of the things that we said in the paper were just, like I said, they were devastating. But we were trying to adopt what we would call a precautionary principle, where, okay, even if you're making estimates and there's some uncertainty involved in all estimates, it's still on balance too dangerous to have in the public. And moreover, the trials were clearly underreporting that all of the two major trials, all of the data that came from those trials was a gross underestimate of the true damage that was being caused, even though when you reanalyze those trials, you could still see there was a much higher rate of serious adverse events like heart attacks and strokes in the vaccine group versus the placebo group. And it was statistically significant in the Pfizer trial, 36% higher. And then this is based on reanalyzing after the authorization process, because if that information had come out before the authorization, they never would have allowed it, So they rushed it through the authorization, and then afterwards we find out all this really devastating information, like heart damage, serious heart events, cardiac events, 4 times more in the vaccine group than in the placebo group. And again, statistically significant. Not big numbers, because the trial itself was focused on healthy people. So when you're focused on relatively healthy people, you're not going to see big numbers. And it was only 2 months, 2 to 3 months. So by definition, these things were not safe because they hadn't had the usual 10 to 15 year period to really check out the potential serious adverse events. So I'm rambling, but that gives you kind of an overview of like some of the issues that we addressed. We made calculations. I think one of the most devastating calculations we made had to do with myocarditis, and we focused a lot on the heart inflammation issue, myocarditis in the young people. And as Dr. McCullough has talked about many times, he's our senior author, and he's probably can dance circles around most cardiologists with his knowledge and especially his understanding of myocarditis. 2 to 3% of let's see, so the vaccine induced myocarditis risk is about 2.5%. Okay, for both for either the Pfizer or the Moderna shots. That's about 2,500 out of every 100,000 shots. Okay, so if you look at adolescent teens, and we have a really nice graph about this in our paper, it's like 2.2%, but their risk of myocarditis from SARS-CoV-2 infection, the so-called coronavirus, is not so-called, the coronavirus is 0.06%. So that's 37 times lower than the risk associated with the vaccine. So the vaccine has 37 times higher risk of myocarditis than if you were exposed to the virus. And that's for adolescent teens. So for that group, especially when you look at their risk of dying from COVID, which is basically zero. I mean, people have been saying this for several years now, and it's very clear, that the young people never should have had these shots. that's probably one of the greatest crimes there is, because a lot of these kids now are walking around with permanent heart damage. And because it's often asymptomatic, they don't even know they have it. It may be like a mild pain, but they don't even know. And so decades later, they get congestive heart failure. And that's the tragedy. We are a culture that tends to look at short-term effects. If you have, let's say, 50,000 people in a huge stadium and a bomb is dropped in the stadium, that's called a tragedy. But if those same 50,000 people are killed by a toxic product over the course of, say, 10 or 20 or 30 years, nobody bats an eye,
Hmm.
you know? And it's a fascinating kind of issue with the human psyche, that we don't really appreciate the long-term effects. And we can sort of predict them based on things like myocarditis, because there is a definite long-term risk associated with it. So the media constantly saying, "Oh, this is a mild problem, don't worry about it." Um, you know, and the reason they say that is because it often does present in a mild way. It may be like a heart pain, chest pain, might not be very overwhelming, but in some cases it can be very overwhelming. It can be very painful. But in many, many cases, it's very mild, which is why they said that. But the media never told people, by the way, could have heart failure a couple decades from now, because that's one of the main risks. We also talked about cancer, the immune dysfunction and the inflammation and the various things that tend to promote cancer. And we talked about the DNA contamination issues, which had come in at the end. I'm sure Dr. McCullough or somebody has talked with you about that on the show. But the main thing there is that the process one, which was used to create the vaccine for the trials, was different from the process they used to release it to the public. The process they used for the public, we now know all of those vaccine samples to date, all of them have been shown to be contaminated with varying degrees of the bacterial DNA, which is used to mass produce it, and that SV40 sequence, which we talked about in our paper, also is associated with cancer. But because these things the batches are so variable, it's basically like Russian roulette, right? People don't know which batch they're getting. 30% of the batches don't have any symptoms associated with them, pretty mild, but then there's like 4 to 8% that are considered very dangerous and potentially lethal. Um, so we talked about that. I'm sure that triggered the industry quite a bit, because we provided some very good documentation for that. And then I made a statement in the paper that I still to this day kind of gives me goosebumps even when I think about it, is that it is an unethical and unconscionable to administer an experimental vaccine to a child who has a near zero risk of dying from COVID-19, but a well-established 2.2% risk of permanent heart damage. And I think that statement and some of the other statements in the paper were just like too much. It was too much, and so we got censored. And I'm happy to talk about the censorship, the retraction, all that, and how that came about. But go ahead and feel free to make a comment.
That what you said about the kids is
Oh,
I'm 50 months into this show, 50, and being banned from all the major media platforms has, what a surprise, uh really eviscerated and massacred my show in many ways in terms of its potential reach and thus potential revenue to being a profitable business which can support me. That being said, I was joking the other night about, like, man, if I could go back, would I do all the same stuff? And I was beginning to say, like, no, not at all. I wish my show was more viable and more profitable to sponsors. And in some ways, I I do regret it because so many of the people that I feel like I'm trying to help, I just feel like I've never told anyone don't get the shot. I've said, but you should know everything out there that there is. And I don't have a wife, I don't have kids, I don't have a normal job. I'm my own boss. I'm free to go in and research this stuff and interview these people and put it out there. And I feel like there is some sort of moral obligation. But the very people I've tried to help are often the people that scream at me and call me a Nazi. And I was like,
Mhm.
yeah, that doesn't put a good feeling in my stomach. I wish I didn't. But then, and I caught myself while saying this to my friend. This is like 48 hours ago. And I was like, but then I think about like all the kids who didn't, if you're an adult, I really think you should be able to go do whatever you want. You want to go get the shot, go for it. If you want to go get heroin, I'm a libertarian. Then I think, yeah, if you're not hurting anybody, go for it. If you're a consenting adult in your own home, do whatever you want. But then I think about kids and I go, that's pure evil. These are you're damaging, you're swelling their heart tissue. There's really kind of no forgiveness in that. And when I said that, then it dawned on me. I was like, no, I would do it again. That is something where if you're an adult, hey man, go for it. I think you should be able to. You want to go skydiving, go for it. You want to go become a mercenary, go for it. This is your incarnation in this world. But the
Mhm.
whole do it to kids, everyone's up in arms if you see some
Yeah,
kid in a home where both parents smoke cigarettes indoor. You go, that's not fair. This kid's
yeah,
starting off on a losing hand. He's gonna have cancer by the time he's 20. He never even smoked. When it comes
right.
to this, it's why is this not the same thing? Um,
Yeah,
re-
and the programming, the way the kids were programmed, like, and the fact that they were forced in the education system to get these shots, that's criminal.
it's
That's
evil.
criminal. We should not have forced these kids in the universities. They couldn't go to classes if they didn't get the shots. They had to come back on campus, and I
Sure.
mean,
It's it's coercion. No, and even that, no, you're right. It's stuff like that where it's like that's not the same as an adult making their choice. I mean, if I was in college, I was pre-med, I was so obsessed with school, and if somebody told me I had to get this shot or I had to stop going to I probably would have taken it. And so there's a lot of pure evil. But hey, real quick, tell everyone where to download the paper. I didn't go to the restroom after my last show, and I really got to go. So I'll be right back.
okay, yeah. So the way that you would get access to this paper right now is a little tricky because we were retracted, so it's not available anymore in the Curious portal. If you go onto PubMed, it will show you that it's been retracted. But we will be putting it on a preprint server in a slightly modified form very shortly. So it's about to be placed there. We are also submitting it to two other journals for consideration. Both of them say they want to publish it. And so we will be hopefully publishing within 2 to 3 weeks. And I think it's going to be a great thing because we're actually developing it even more with some emphasis on the fraudulent nature of many of the studies that have been used to prop up the narrative that these things are safe and effective, profoundly flawed studies, dozens and dozens of them. And then the censorship issue itself, we're addressing in the paper with a sort of a brief summary of uh, what we went through with the process of submitting it to Curious and having the retraction happen within 1 month of publication. And the paper, uh, we believe, was retracted because it was too successful. 330,000 reads within 30 days, whereas the journal had an average of 2,700 reads in a whole year for their previous articles. So it was clearly getting way too much attention. And then at the same time, our ratings were really high. What's called the scholarship impact quotient was 9.3 by the time the paper was retracted. That's 1 out of 10 score. And that 9.3 score includes the many zero ratings that were offered by the vaccine industry. So anyway,
Sorry about
just
that.
no. I was just explaining to
Right.
your audience, where you can get. You can't actually get it anymore through the Curious portal because of the retraction, but we're putting it on a preprint server, and then we're submitting it to two other journals, and both the journals say that they want it. So one of those journals we know is not going to get retracted. The other one we don't really know, but
You you should just
no, it just comes with the territory. You're taking a risk. You just have to kind of hope that goodness of humanity will prevail, the desire to tell the truth and to protect the young people and the old people, because many old people were unfortunately eliminated because of these shots. The frail elderly were in the nursing homes, had the highest mortality rate associated with these shots. And, the reason a lot of doctors have been misled about this, and I just want to speak to this because this is really important. Um, Back in 2021, the emphasis was, okay, let's protect the elderly people, those with multiple underlying diseases, because they're considered most at risk of dying from COVID-19. So let's protect them with these shots. Okay. What happened that most people are totally unaware of, including doctors who were working at these clinics and hospitals, they thought that when they saw somebody die of COVID-19, they thought that they were seeing unvaccinated people dying. But what they didn't realize is when those people came in, they weren't registered as vaccinated, often for several months, okay, because there was a delay in the registration of vaccination status. And also in many cases, they only had one shot. If you only had one shot, you were considered unvaccinated within the hospital system. You had to get the two shots in order to be considered fully vaccinated. So your vaccination status was considered substandard or not, even unvaccinated. They would say, "Are you fully vaccinated?" No, right? Because you only had the one shot. Plus, if you unfortunately had a really serious adverse event like you know some major blood clotting issue, or which, as you know, is extremely common, bad neurological effects, autoimmune effects, cardiac heart issues. If any of those things happened before 14 days after the second shot, which is very common, you were still considered unvaccinated. And you got registered as that in the system. And the doctors who were dealing with these patients were under the impression that the unvaccinated elderly people were the ones who were mainly dying. And they were telling everybody else, they were saying, "Oh my gosh, I'm only seeing unvaccinated people dying here." Okay. This was one of the biggest deceptions because it created a narrative that was supported by the doctors themselves because they believed what the definition of vaccination status was, how that was translated into the hospital system, okay, as a way of indicating whether somebody was vaccinated or not. And so even to this day, you will meet many doctors who say, "Well, I know back in 2021 that it was all unvaccinated people who were dying," you know. Excuse me. And it created an illusion,
Mm.
a serious illusion. And many doctors continue to hold on to that belief because since that time, they've been recommending these shots. And so to then read a paper like ours and go, "Oh my gosh, wait a second, that can't be right," that it's causing far more cardiac deaths, 4 times more in the intervention group for the clinical trial than in the placebo group. are you kidding me? You know, I mean, and twice as many deaths, which is what they showed. Cardiac deaths were twice as high. I mean, that can't be right. I mean, that was even a healthy population, but we know that those stats are much worse in the elderly, in the very elderly people. So I think this is a kind of crisis at this point in consciousness and in belief systems and how we grasp, how we get our minds around evidence, you know. And the human mind tends to rearrange the beliefs in order to rearrange the evidence in order to conform with the beliefs, you know. Whatever your beliefs are and your worldview, you make the evidence kind of, you know, adapt to that. And even scientists do that, even doctors do that, you know. So
Well,
it's very challenging. And I just want to say a couple points about the retraction because it was so profound. You know, we got this letter. It was 8 points from the Springer Research Integrity Group, which to me sounds very Orwellian. You know, research integrity.
the
Like,
research integrity,
right,
the love and not evil group.
right. Like they're telling us about integrity, you know. I mean, yeah, love and not evil. But yeah, so all 8 points were false and misleading. I mean, they were totally unsupported by evidence. Some of them appeared to be directly adapted from these offensive statements that were made by the trolls, the social media trolls, in the Curious portal underneath the article. Okay, so when the article's published, you can make comments underneath
Hmm.
it, right? And so you had to register in the system, and then you make your comments. Well, they had these vaccine industry trolls who are well known come in there. Jonathan Laxton and Michael or Matthew Doppler. I call them Doppler and Laxton. But anyway,
Jerk
sorry.
off an asshole. No, I don't
Couldn't
care.
help it. Couldn't help
No,
it.
I don't care. Go for it, man. These people are
But
demons
they
from
were
hell.
offensive. Well, they're so offensive. They're offensive and misleading comments. They just lead a whole trail of them. They cite research that's completely flawed, but because they have no background in epidemiology and biostatistics, they don't know what the heck they're talking about. You know, so they just say these things, and it creates confusion in the portal. And I think what happened is, and we know that this happened because we have the inside scoop. Okay, I can't tell you. I'm not making this up. We actually do know. We have names from inside the system. I have to be very careful here because there's legal implications. But um, the we know that they got a barrage of phone calls and messages from, you can only guess, from the industry to have this paper retracted. We know that. And Steve Kirsch wants to sue them for this, sue both the publisher and the journal. And that may happen. But when you look at the 8 points that were made, okay, as I said, they were false and misleading, but 4 of those 8 points, if you look at them, they actually look like they were written as position statements by the vaccine industry. Okay. Like, for example, that, you know, that the mRNA vaccines are not gene therapy products. Okay. That the products are not contaminated with bacterial DNA. That the spike protein doesn't linger in the body and cause adverse effects. I mean, this is bizarre that they could say that. And then the most amazing statement was they said that the mRNA products underwent adequate safety and efficacy testing. Okay. Now that was the central premise of our whole paper. Okay. So there's no possible way that the editors of the journal could have looked at our paper and said, well, you know, this is a good fit for our journal. You should publish with our journal. There's no way, because that was the core message, that they never went adequate safety and efficacy testing. They never went through that. So it's clear to us that these were position statements, and they wanted them stated so that for the record, all of these things are what sunk this paper, because clearly this paper, by saying these things, was saying was misinformation, right? Our paper was giving misinformation on each of those four position statements,
Hmm.
you know, and yet in our paper we provided the documentation, exhaustive documentation, number one. Number two, we had 8 independent reviewers who went through the whole thing over 2.5 months, and they went through all those points with over 200 comments. So that, I mean, I had to deal with that, and my wife, thank God she's still with me, but it was not an easy process, and we had to have. I was able to recruit help from our team, to get the team to work together. We had great co-authors, Jessica Rose, fantastic
Mm-hmm. She's
immunologist.
awesome.
Uh, Russ Wolfinger, who you don't know, but he's a great biostatistician from Research Triangle Park in New York, in North Carolina. Can't believe I said New York. I came from North Carolina. And then we had Steve Kirsch, who's uh, I had to include him also, not only because he's so vocal and willing to look at things out of the box, which I really appreciate, but he also was instrumental in this whole paper coming together, because I would never have done this without having access to all these great scientists and having those discussions, which he coordinated. Those weekly discussions were coordinated by Steve Kirsch. So the paper grew out of those discussions. And then, of course, Peter McCullough. And then we had Chris Dennerhink, who's an amazing guy. He's an epidemiologist from the University of Basel in Switzerland, one of the top epidemiologists I've ever worked with, and he's just fantastic. And then Stephanie Seneff, who is from
Had her
MIT, and
on. Yeah,
yeah,
she spoke about glyphosate.
she's brilliant. Yeah, she's absolutely brilliant. Yeah, her glyphosate work, her glyphosate research is fantastic. Everyone should read her book. So, with that team, we just had such solid ground to stand on. And there was no way that, the reviewers could really, the reviewers were great too, and they gave us lots of excellent feedback. But, all it came down to was we were we were being told at the end that our paper was retracted, and it was obvious it was on false pretenses. And this is what you call a predatory retraction, okay? A predatory retraction is something that benefits the pharmaceutical industry, or the biopharmaceutical complex is how Dr. McCullough
Mm-hmm.
refers to it, which is that collaboration between the government agencies, the pharmaceutical industry, media, it's that whole biopharmaceutical complex benefits from this, because even the media, if they've been saying these things, they don't want to look bad.
Yeah.
They've been saying these things for legacy media for so long. So their predatory retraction serves three major functions. And the first thing is that it hides the critical information that we're trying to expose, right? Because we're trying to talk about the harm that caused by these COVID shots. So we're trying to expose it so we can help public health, right? But it's hurting the pharmaceutical companies' bottom line, So that's why they want to hide it, number one. Number two, it's trying to undermine the credibility of the research itself that we presented in the paper, because it's published in other journals and it's gone through peer review processes with those other journals. And so it's really valid research, but they're trying to undermine the credibility of that research, right? And then the third thing is, of course, they're trying to damage the reputations of the co-authors. They're trying to tarnish our reputations so that we can't go out and publish elsewhere. I mean, it's really a brilliant predatory retraction is a brilliant strategy on the
Mm,
part of the industry, and for them it's a big win-win, right? Because they can and they'll go to great ends to bribe or coerce a publisher to retract a major scientific paper, because that any paper that says that these things are unsafe and ineffective as opposed to safe and effective, and you argue it really, in a compelling way, and you say, by the way, there should be a global moratorium on these things, and by the way, children should never receive this, it should be off the childhood immunization schedule, and it should happen now. Well, you're going to see predatory retractions all over the place. So this is going to force a lot of scientists to really look at alternative ways of getting published. And, I'm grateful for Substack because a lot of scientists are choosing to use Substack. Jessica Rose has a great Substack, Peter McCullough. I completely encourage your listeners to listen to check out both of those Substacks because they're really great. And also, I really encourage people to follow Peter McCullough on X or Twitter or whatever it's called. Um,
I was going
so
to, in terms of predatory retractions, I think it was like last year or the year before, which state it was, but they were proposing a bill for marijuana legalization. And like the two biggest lobbying opponents were, unsurprisingly, the alcohol industry. But the next one, and I thought this was just completely evil, was the prison guard lobby.
mm,
That's less people in prison, and you're
mm,
like, holy shit! Like you're like you're like I, I'm never surprised by corporate greed. It doesn't make it right, but it's kind of something you read about, and you're like, yeah, what do of course they're evil. But then you
mm,
see that, and you're like, dude, that's so fucked. Like you're just like the prison guard industry. They're like, yeah, no, we can't have this stuff legal. There's less people in these cells, and less people. I ain't gonna have as many shifts. You're like, God, this is, which almost kind of makes it more difficult to fight, right? It's one thing if you're, fighting these corporations to get a moratorium on these shots and, maybe they're true believers because a true believer still implies that there's someone who's willing to look at some sort of facts, numbers, or data. But
yeah.
there's something even a little more difficult to work with when it's just money, right? Because if it's just money, then they really don't care. And on
Mm-hmm.
one hand, it's simpler because you know what their goal is, but on the other hand, it's impossible because their goal can't be negotiated with. It's somebody who's just making money hand over fist. It doesn't matter what data you show them, right? It's right. You can convince when a kid gets older, you can convince them that, Santa's not real. But
Mm-hmm.
if you're, I don't know, if you're selling inflatable Santas around Christmas, and you go, hey man, these things aren't real. You look at you and be like, yeah, I know. This pays for my house. Like you almost can't work with it. There's like nothing to be done almost.
Yeah. I mean, you bring up an interesting point too about like what you're selling because, you know, these products, these mRNA products created the illusion of safety because of the fact that they were so variable in their effects on people. So you would have a lot of elderly people who had no reactions, because they they got the good stuff. They got or the stuff that not good stuff, the stuff that was not active, that wasn't going to cause so much problems, right? And so, but there's been so much programming going on of the general public, as you know, for 15, 20 years now. It's not recent. This is the the media mechanisms that have been used in the past few years are incredibly sophisticated for manipulating people. I'll give you an example. I was visiting my mother, and she loves to watch hockey. She's 88 years old, but she loves watching ice hockey. I used to be an
That's
ice hockey
awesome.
fan. My brothers and I were all icy. We're still hockey players, but I've switched to basketball. But anyway, she and I were watching this game, a live game, Boston Bruins. And in the middle of the game, they split the screen, and half the screen, they're watching a live game. It's not even a commercial break. You're still watching the game on half the screen. The other half is take the shot with a picture of the syringe and the Pfizer logo below it, right? Take the shot, right? Which,
That's
of course, is what you want to say to a hockey player
yeah,
when they have to take
yeah.
a shot, right? So it's like subliminal programming. And I remember telling my mother about, I watched a few games with her, and I remember saying to her afterwards, said, wow, it's so weird the way they would like split the screen and, try to sell the vaccines during the game while you're trying to watch the game. It's, first of all, it's really obnoxious because, it's reducing the size of the screen. But then you're just like trying to sell something, and and she goes, what do you mean? I don't remember seeing anything like that. What are you talking about? And she was so used to it that
Mm,
she had just come to see it as like a take the shot thing, like, oh, go Bruins, take the shot, right?
yeah,
and,
yeah.
and, and so, like, that's an example of all of the ways that we've created this confusion. And one more thing about the retraction that I'll say, predatory retraction, is that it really erodes public trust in scientific research and scientific debate and publishing, because you create all of this cognitive dissonance and disillusionment with the whole system. You know, when there's a retraction like this, people start to go, oh, I can't trust any journals. I can't trust any published research or any scientific debate because it's all being controlled. It's and that's kind of sad, because the scientific process and scientific debate is a good thing. It's a good thing. We should be able to have open debate among people who are willing to question each other's points of view and to have a respectful exchange where we can say, without trying to insult each other or being superior toward the other, to just say, well, I have a different perspective. This is my perspective, and this is the research that I know supports this perspective, and let's have a discussion about it. But
Mm.
what's happening is the whole framework of scientific conversation and debate and publishing is now being eroded by these predatory retractions. And I thought of something last night. I want to tell you about it because it's kind of, I think you'll appreciate this, even though you're not married, you haven't gone through marriage yet, but um, you've heard of a prenup agreement, right?
Hmm.
Well, I was thinking we should have pre-pub agreements. So in other words, before publication, you get a written agreement with the publisher that they are not going to bow to pressure from the industry to get a paper retracted.
Yeah,
Okay.
otherwise we won't give it to them.
Yeah, you have a pre-pub agreement, and if they assign that when the paper's accepted, then if there is a retraction, they have to pay like a giant fee, like $1 million or
Yeah,
something, to the authors, because of punitive damages to their reputation, right?
sure.
Because
No, that's not even a half bad idea.
yeah, I think it could work. A pre-pub agreement. Let's
Yeah, a
make it work.
retraction that, and then they would be able to, they would of course be able to view the paper first, because you wouldn't want that abused by, just tactically thinking. If I was like a Pfizer executive, I would be like, all right, start submitting a bunch of bullshit to these publications so that they
Yeah,
wouldn't retract them, but then that will destroy their reputation. That's not a half bad idea. Yeah, no, yeah. Punitive damages, because if you get a retracted paper, that looks
yeah.
bad on you. No, that's not a you could probably, but you'd have to have a reason for them to do it. Right now, it kind of seems like there's nothing really forcing them to do it, right? They don't care. What do they care?
Well, yeah, that's a good point, but they might want, let's
You'd have
say
to have
that,
like you'd have to have a lobby of authors. You'd have
well,
to have like a union.
it would also be like a badge of honor for journals that are willing to offer it. Because
Yeah,
if journals are willing to offer it, you would say, okay, that journal looks like it could be trustworthy. But if
yeah,
they're not willing to offer it, you know that they're in the pocket of the industry,
yeah.
because they're too afraid and they're already anticipating that they're going to get a lot of flack and maybe they already have uh, pre-publication agreements with industry that if something is too
Probably do
controversial,
it.
you know,
Yeah, honestly, it's not the more fun answer, but it might be that the best thing to do is to get retractions because on a long enough timeline, they will add up, and you will, it's like when you like look back even just 21 years, right? We're coming up on March, and you look at just we all remember it, but I mean, you really should go back and watch news clips of people defending
yeah,
the invasion of Iraq. I mean, people who are still news anchors today, and you see the stuff they're spewing, and you're like, it's so comically wrong. Like, we got to take down Saddam Hussein. We don't know whether or not he was involved with bin Laden. We need to bring democracy to it. And you're thinking
yeah,
about it now, with 21 years in hindsight,
right,
7,500 U.S. men and women, servicemen and women killed, 1.5 million civilians killed, $7 trillion down the drain. And you're looking at it now and you're like, yeah, man, no, like those people are in the pockets. Like I would bet anything they're in the pockets of defense contractors. Like you really do need to go look back at that and also remember that that's probably how in
yes,
20 years, that's probably how people are going to look at this whole vaccine thing. They're going to be like, all right, well, now we know it killed 2 million Americans. But you got to remember at the time, everyone was on board with it. And you're going to be like, no, a lot of people weren't on board with it. I really do think that's what will happen is much like the Iraq war, we'll look back and we'll go, yeah, it's 1.5 million people. But then there's a new problem and you just forget it. You go, but now we gotta go support Ukraine or Israel or Gaza or Taiwan or China or pick your poison. And but you got to get the shots and they just
right.
laundered onto the next thing. There's just a bigger and bigger story coming out, and so, but I mean,
Well,
like
yeah, you make a really important point. I think the whole war industry is you
they
know,
also own the biopharmaceutical complex. The biopharmaceutical complex is a
yeah,
subsidiary of the military industrial complex. So
yeah.
of course, it's acting the same. The
Well,
apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
yeah. I mean, I was a newspaper editor back in the late 1980s. I'm dating myself a little bit right now, but I was writing political editorials, and I wrote a series of editorials begging the United States not to engage with Iraq. And George Bush Sr. at the time was saying things like, "Oh, don't worry, Saddam. We're not going to do anything. We're not going to bomb. You go ahead and go to Kuwait. It's
Good.
fine. Just go to Kuwait. We won't do anything." Then, of course, he turned around and bombed like crazy and
Yeah, we went in with
started
Schwarzkopf. Yeah,
right. And then but at the time, I wrote these editorials. I was told by the publisher, this is kind of ironic because it was my first experience with censorship. And the publisher said, well, our readers are getting very upset. We're getting lots of mail. In fact, we never had this much mail before. And I said, well, that's a good sign. They're reading, the editorials. That's a good thing, right? He goes, no, no, no. These are
no, no.
nasty, nasty emails because this was in North Carolina. It was a military area,
Mm-hmm.
the newspaper was going out to 5 counties that had a heavy military presence in terms
Gotcha.
of people in the war. So I was definitely I was walking on fire, and I knew that I was putting myself at risk, but I kept writing the editorials. I said, no, I'm not gonna be censored here. I'm not going to be censored, and so I got fired from that position after writing about, I don't know, 3 or 4 more
That's
very tough.
awesome.
I'm still very proud. There's some like best editorials I've ever written. I'm very proud of them. And I ended up getting invitations to write for the Progressive magazine, which I did. I wrote a cover story for them. I also wrote something about the experience of being censored, which I still have. It was called Out in the Cold. Because what happened as a result of that is I ended up getting teaching high school biology for the next 4 years because I had been looking for this job, and I landed an incredible job teaching high school biology. Replaced a teacher who had a nervous breakdown, and she had ideal classes, strangely, but she was a PhD and a little too controlling of the classes. So I ended up having this great teaching gig, and then I went to graduate school, School of Public Health, UNC School of Public Health. Um, I was there during the time that Ralph Barrick was doing his evil research on the bioweapons aspects of the virus, and so I've never used that word evil before publicly, but I guess it's a good word to use in
Well,
this context.
he's an evil man.
Yeah, because it was designed to do many bad things in the body. And the vaccine solution, so to speak, was also designed. So it was a complementary bioweapons strategy that had very dark repercussions for the whole world. And we may be seeing these things for a very long time. As I said, I mean, the time thing is that's the big question: is how long is this going to go on? And I think what's happening is it's setting a lot of people up for neurological and immune problems over the long term. You know, I'm really concerned about the fact that this causes neuroinflammation when you get these shots, and the mRNA, which is encoded, it's encapsulated in this lipid nanoparticle delivery system. It gets into the brain, and then it starts producing these spike proteins and causes neuroinflammation. A lot of things can happen as a result of that, depending on the parts of the brain that are being affected. You can have learning ability affected. You can have cognitive ability. You can have um, the psychoses that have been clearly documented, case reports of psychosis published in the medical literature. And I think it's very possible that part of the irrational response is not just the programming from the media, which is kept saying, through the propaganda machine, safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective, and people eventually believed it. But it's not just that. I think these vaccines are affecting cognitive function in some people and a lot of people. And there might be a continuum between what we call intellectual disability or cognitive impairment, which could be relatively mild. And there's a continuum between that and the psychosis outcome that is being documented as a result of these shots, and it's kind of frightening to think that so many people could be affected in that way over time. I pray that many people are protected against it and it doesn't ever happen, but it just it's a very dark aspect of this whole thing is how it's affecting the mind and consciousness, um, and the intersection of the media machine creating all of this disinformation, from the centers the CDC. We trusted it. The scientists who came into the pandemic, we all trusted it. Even
Sure.
all my public health colleagues at UNC School of Public Health and other places, Harvard, Yale, we all trusted
I did at the
that.
beginning. Everyone did.
Yeah, but that was the problem. And the problem now is that we have a lot of people who think that they understand science, but they don't understand science. Even doctors, they don't have training in epidemiology and biostatistics. Most medical doctors don't know how to analyze research. So when they look at it, they think, oh, I can just look at the study. Oh, that's proving that the vaccine works. But many of those studies, I looked at over 80 studies when I was working with Steve Kirsch's group, this group of scientists. And we looked at over 80 studies, and we found that all of them were fundamentally flawed.
Yeah.
Okay. Yet they were saying that the vaccinated were more protected than the unvaccinated. It was absolutely false. It was absolutely false. It was
Well,
incredible.
in that sense, it might be, I don't want to say good because that's kind of a heartless way to say it, but I guess good. You might have needed something like this. It's one
Yeah.
thing if I, at the beginning, I remember right when it was probably like 4 years ago. Yeah, it's like I started the podcast December 2019. Yeah, I'd say by like January, February, I was like calling the CDC. I was like, can I get someone on my podcast to talk about what's going on? And I think I called the FDA. I was calling like all these places to try to get people on. Yeah, and I never once batted, by then I'd learned enough about history in the military industrial complex. I'm like, yeah, they're evil. But there was still, I mean, in hindsight, I can say a naive belief, like, yeah, but no, not the CDC, not the FDA. Like, this is, these are people that are, and I had friends whose dads were doctors, are still doctors, like high up, and I'm like, these are great people. I've met them, right? They wrote me a letter of recommendation in college to, apply to med school, and I look back at it, and so it's one thing if I believe it. It's another thing if all the doctors also believe it. That stands to prove that we had all kind of fell for the imagery of it. It's these big
Right.
noble institutions and the doctors in the white coat. You're like, surely these guys just do the right thing. Maybe you needed something like the last four, and it's again sounds evil,
No, I
but
think you're right.
you might have needed the last 4 years to sort of show people, because otherwise
You're right.
you're just a crazy person. The FDA is evil. It's like, all right, you idiot. You might have had to have the last 4 years to have people finally go, hey, man, I saw it with my own eyes.
Yeah,
You
well,
know,
it's
it's
interesting.
sad.
Yeah, yeah, the FDA, we've known for decades that
Sure.
they were captured,
The
but the
CDC is like a harder pill to swallow. You're like,
CDC
it's
is much harder.
doctors. Yeah,
Yeah,
FDA is a bad example.
yeah.
CDC, yeah, you're like, what?
CDC has become the Centers for Deception and Control,
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and they are better at it than anybody. And what I found out early on was they had clean ship early on in the pandemic. They got rid of the
The
scientists
dissenters.
that, well, the people who had the most integrity, who were willing to call out what was going on as far as corruption. If there were bad studies, they were willing to call it out, and those guys are gone. They no longer exist there anymore. So what's happened is you got a whole bunch of people who have all given in and decided, okay, well, I'm just going to go along with this, and I'm going to, put even putting my name on these, like they'll publish in their MMWR reports, mortality, morbidity weekly reports. They publish these big studies, and they put like dozens of names on these studies that are all CDC people, and so it makes it look very authoritative, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's actually really bad
Yeah.
disinformation, and it's so ironic. You people like you and me and so many get called misinformation spreaders.
Yeah.
Um, it's really malicious, and it's libel because we're the ones who are telling the truth. We're the ones who are actually looking at, because we're not afraid to look at what we see in front of our eyes, you know, and
Yeah.
and, and we have intuition and common sense. And I loved it that Joe Ladapo, he gave a talk recently about the DNA contamination issue, which Dr. McCullough calls process-related impurities. These things that are associated with the production of these products. Um, but Joe Ladapo said, um, you really have to trust intuition, which I thought was such a great thing for a scientist to say,
I,
because in order to see through the deception, to see through these illusions that are constantly being generated by the media as an extension of the biopharmaceutical complex, um, you have to have intuition to see through those illusions. You need it, and it takes. I mean, it takes meditation or prayer or whatever to drop into a kind of quiet place in yourself
yeah.
to be able to see through all this stuff, all through the noise, of
Yeah.
the disinformation machine. Um,
Uh,
so I really appreciate the work that you're doing, Tommy, and I really want to help your show continue to flourish. So,
Thank you.
anything I can do, I will certainly do it. I have not been good about getting on social media and stuff, but I, you know,
Yeah, I mean, there's as I was saying, I'm banned from most of it, so it might not even be worth your time. But I want to talk about that, and we can always do another show. But it's 11:20 now. I got to wrap it up by like
yeah,
11:30. But I want to talk about what you told me he said about intuition. I've had Dr. Latipo on here once before, but it was probably like a year ago. But there's a great quote I always bring up, and it's by former Secretary of Defense General Mattis, and it's there's two quotes, and I like how they tie into one another. And the first is, if you have not read hundreds of history books by the time you're an adult, then you are functionally illiterate. And the second quote is, intuition is subconscious pattern recognition, nothing more, nothing less.
mm,
And I
mm,
think about like machine learning, like when you fill out a CAPTCHA, just select all the streetlights and the whatever, make sure you're a human. Like that's
mm,
not just to make sure you're a human. That stuff is actually that data itself is sold to AI research because if it happens billions of times a day, you can feed that into an AI that can get better at, picking at the streetlights or whatever.
mm,
Um, but you have to draw that out to the next conclusion and be like, well, how would someone like General Mattis, somebody who's in control or was in control of the largest military in the history of man, the U.S. military? Well, you've got to read hundreds of history books and about warfare, and to the point where you can have a subconscious intuition about something, and you don't necessarily have to be able to cite the historical precedent for it at that moment. You might be able to later on after some reflection. But in that moment, you might just go with intuition. Like when a football player just cuts left, right? Or like Larry Bird, they said he could just see the next 10 seconds of the core. They said he could just see time. And
yeah,
you see an old replay of him just, yeah, cutting right, you're like, the hell is he doing? And then he steals the ball, and you're like, how did he? It's because he had played a million pickup games. So the point is, though, is when it comes to intuition, like
mhm,
you just gotta follow your gut. And no, you don't need a 9 PhDs in molecular biology. There are gut things to follow. And
yeah,
like when I was dating a girl in college, and I remember one time I was watching her cat, and I was an idiot, and I let the cat got out. And I was like, this cat hated being touched, didn't want to come near you, and I had to lure her back in. And I eventually lured her back in with treats. And
mm,
it's like even that, 10 years later, come get the vaccine, you'll get a donut. You have that little historical precedent in your mind where you go, wait a second, where have I seen this before? What are they
mm,
trying? Why are they offering a donut?
mm,
Why are they offering a carrot? Where's the stick? Well, here's the stick. Coercion. You can't come back to school. You can't
yeah,
just little things like listen to your gut. Listen to your gut when something doesn't seem right, when there's groupthink and everyone's attacking you for going against, the primary mode of belief, when yeah, you see that subliminal stuff on a hockey game,
yeah.
even if you don't have any of that, and you
And
just and
trust it too, right? Listen
trust
to
it.
it and trust it. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is what I'll say is, and if your intuition is wrong, that's okay. It's okay to go, well, you know what? I think I was being safe rather than sorry. And what if 4 years later it turns out that these things are great and everyone that got it didn't get COVID and they live forever and whatever? You could say, hey, you know what? That's on me. I was a little paranoid. I'm sorry. That's okay. No one's gonna fault you for that, right? I lock my door every night despite the fact I'm in a building that's already locked. Hey, I'd rather be safe than sorry. Trust your trust your intuition. And if it
Mhm.
just seems odd
Yeah.
that you're like, I don't get it. I've had COVID. I didn't get sick. Why do I have to get it if it doesn't? What's going on? Why are people asking what happened to HIPAA? Listen to your gut. Your gut's not wrong. And
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the takeaway is because
Yeah.
so easily we can fall into, well, I'm not a doctor, so I don't know. And if you're arguing about the genetic makeup of a Drosophila melanogaster fly in a biolab, well, you do need a degree. You're arguing about some esoteric niche stuff. But if it's
Mhm.
just this general, somebody's trying to break it down into what it really is. Somebody wants me to put a needle into my arm and inject something, and I'm not entirely sure what it is. Yeah,
Right.
you have every right and every natural right. I don't care what's written on legislation. Natural law. yeah, man, you have the autonomy over your body to go, yeah, I'm not comfortable, or hey, I'll wait, or hey, it's none of your business what I do. And
Absolutely,
that's a
absolutely.
harder thing to sell because you can't necessarily point to a measurement or a peer reviewed paper about intuition. You can't quantify it. You can't go, look, we measured your intuition on the scale and it didn't hit the necessary. You can't do that. And so it's easy to say, oh, you're just paranoid, or oh, you're an anti-vaxxer. But
Mhm.
listen to your gut, man.
Yeah,
It's gotten us this far, this many years, millions of years in the human evolution. Like there's a reason why something's telling you it's not all peachy. So
yeah.
that's kind of my
And it's
rant on
also,
that.
no, no, I appreciate that. There's also a nice segue from intuition to common sense and also to imagination. You know,
Mm,
Einstein said imagination is more important than knowledge. And I think when we allow ourselves to imagine possibilities without calling it paranoia or without calling it, a conspiracy fantasies, because some conspiracies are true, right? So conspiracy thinking is actually very, we know Iran Contra was true, and we know, there are
Albert
all
I
kinds.
Al sorry, Albert Einstein and other German physicist Leo Szilard, they both left Germany in the early 30s, and they were called
Yeah,
goofy by their friends because they had the wild idea that I don't really like this whole trend of demonizing Jews. I think I'm gonna get out.
yeah, and yeah, I mean, what a brilliant thing that they could see through it,
Hmm.
despite all of the programming that was going on for years leading up to World War II and Nazi Germany. I mean, Nazi Germany is a kind of a metaphor for what we've been
It
through.
is it is
It
the
really
golden
is.
standard for
It
seeing
really,
just how far off the rails a society can go and not
yeah,
and not realize it is. To think they're
exactly.
perfectly normal, right?
Yeah,
There's-
I mean, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
We
no,
were,
it's so unsettling because they weren't a bunch of barbarians throwing shit at each other. I mean, they were arguably the most advanced and like culturally progressive society ever.
mm,
Yeah,
mm.
and they went, as Dr. Malone said, and then they went barking mad.
Yeah, and still to this day, I think scientists in Germany are considered some of the top scientists in the world, and physicists and epidemiologists even. I mean, they're absolutely brilliant. But yeah, I mean, what happened before World War II was a programming of the whole population, where the messaging created a population that hated the Jews, and that was kind of by analogy, what's been going on for years here to get people entrained to think that these things are not only safe and effective, but you're actually helping society by taking them.
Mm,
And that's just, yeah, we've got to break that. But I really appreciate again I appreciate you doing this work, and
sure.
that you are outspoken and willing to call truth to power, speak truth to power.
Mm,
Um, and yeah, thank you.
yeah. Well, it's also, you there's a peace inside when
Yeah,
when you've spoken your mind. No,
yeah,
I don't always do it in the smoothest way. I can definitely be rough around the edges, but ultimately, I've done what I've done because I've believed it's the right thing, and I'm
mhm,
also completely okay with the possibility that I'm entirely wrong. Like, all right, but what happens if it turns out we'll end with this, but what happens if it turns out I'm wrong, that these things are fine and that no one died from any adverse events? And they're gonna go, it's like your dog barking at the neighbor. At first you get mad at the dog, we're like, will you shut up? But eventually you realize you're like, the dog is not trying to like annoy you. The dog actually thinks that there is a danger. Ultimately, you should be like, okay, yeah, it was barking at 2 in the morning and that was annoying. But like you scratch his head and you're like, thank you, right? You thought you were doing the right thing. Because at some point in human history, over the 10,000 years of domestication of dogs, they were barking at a wolf. They were helping you. So that's kind of how I look at it. Is like,
mhm.
I've never physically impaired anyone from getting the shot. I've never stood in front of it like, you can't go get this. But if it turns out I'm wrong, which I'm more than okay with being wrong, I don't care. then you know what? I can say, hey, I thought it was this. I thought it was that. I thought that people were really getting hurt. But if it turned out that
Right?
Saddam really did have nukes, yeah, the
Yeah.
people that were naysaying would have been like, hey, I thought it was going to be another Vietnam and then we were going to lose a bunch of lives. I had no idea he had nukes. I apologize.
Mm.
I know my
Yeah.
heart's in the right place. So I don't, what do I care?
Well, you're going with what you see now, and what you know is wrong, and it is wrong.
Hmm.
And whether it turns out years from now that there's some benefit, that seems highly unlikely.
Near
And the
not
fact
impossible, but
and the fact that the drug companies were hiding this data from the public and trying to get it sealed for 75 years
yeah,
tells us that something's very wrong.
yeah.
Uh, but yeah, yeah.
I hope I'm wrong, man.
But
I
I
hope,
appreciate. No, I understand. You're
yeah,
coming from a place of humility and neutrality, which is a really necessary place when you're confronted with a very confusing set of polarized narratives. And I think being neutral and coming from a place of, okay, I'm willing to consider possibilities. Yeah,
do you know how
that
cool it would be if it came out in 10 years? They're like, all right, the shot was actually for a prototype disease that China was developing, and we thought they were going to release it. So we had to inoculate everyone, but we didn't want to freak them out. So we did this. And yeah, a million people died from vaccine injuries, but we theoretically saved 300 million. I would love to be like, I am so sorry, everybody. I was so wrong. Clearly, I love this country. I thought I was doing the right thing. Hey, maybe during the next outbreak, I might keep my mouth shut. Right? Maybe this one isn't for me. I'll check out. That would be awesome. That would be amazing.
I would.
I'm just
But
looking at history, and I don't think that's the case.
but a quick correction there. The estimates are between 13 and 17 million have been killed by these shots.
Let's call it
So,
100 million, but they say
seven-
300. Whatever.
I
It's.
got you. I got you.
I would
Yeah,
love if that was the case.
yeah, yeah.
I just don't think it. Where are the weapons of mass destruction? How come, what happened if we didn't save Vietnam or Korea?
Right.
I'm not seeing it. But, again, that's where the humility comes in.
Yeah.
But for now, we got to wrap this one up. Um, I'd love to have
Great.
you back on, man. And,
Thank you. Thank you.
yeah, dude, keep fighting the good fight. And, maybe we can get you on here with Dr. McCullough or Steve Kirsch or something. And, yeah, I would love to, man. But keep fighting the good fight. You get retractions, you get attacked. It means you're right.
If not this, then something better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you so much for coming on here, guys. Please go in the description. Please go download the paper, and I'll send you the link to this episode. Thank you so much, Mr. Mead.
Great to meet you. Thank
You as
you.
well. Thank you for watching.